Good afternoon or good evening. I want to tell you how grateful I am that you're all here from sincere of my heart. And I'm very thankful that Alejandro Atawuskusi, who's I promised him I would butcher his name, and I did, is to be with us today. I'm very grateful. He is a guitarist, a music perception researcher, band leader of the Afro-Peruvian jazz band Forbidden Tropics, and a William Patterson alum who's been playing with the University Latin Jazz Ensemble since 2013. And he has played with some of the greats. Here's some more names I can butcher. Claudio Roditi, Jimmy Bosch, members of the Tito Puente Orchestra, such as Ray Vega and Mitch Broman. I'm so glad you're here, Alejandro. Please correct my mispronunciation of your name. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Debbie. Before I start, I would like to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to do this lecture, and also thank Bob McGee as well. This is my very first time giving a lecture, so excuse me if I make mistakes, or I've been on the lecture, I'll play a couple of songs, and after that, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to let me know. So for me to talk about the influence on of Latino and American jazz, I first have to go back 100 years ago to Cuba. In the Guantanamo Bay area, there's a U.S. military base. And we have those soldiers that they would hire some local Cuban farmers to grow the crops, food for them, you know. Not only they would hire them to do that, but they would also offer them housing as well. So on one side of the base, you would have the US soldiers, and then on the other side, you would have the local Cuban farmers. During the holidays, I'm talking about Christmas and New Year's, you would have the Cubans coming to the US soldier side, and they would get together and they would share their music. So you'd have the Cubans, they would bring the records and playing Afro-Cuban music, and then you would have the US soldiers sharing their jazz records. So it became a cross-cultural event. Now, I'm not saying that's the origin of Afro-Cuban or Latin jazz, but that was one of the first events where both cultures met. Of course, the US soldiers liked Latin music so much that sometimes they would ask Cubans to go downtown and buy some records for them. At the same time, the Cubans found jazz very interesting because it was nothing like anything they've heard before. So this was about the 1920s. Now, closer to the end of the 1920s, a lot of those soldiers would retire and they would move to the big cities. So we're talking about New Orleans, New York, Chicago, St. Louis. And at the same time, you have the Latinos also moving to the big cities. And the main reason is because of work. Usually the big cities, it's more industrialized, so it's easier to find a job. So you have the Latinos coming to the big cities, especially New York City. And in New York City, you would mainly find Jewish, Italians, African Americans, and the Latinos. And when I say Latinos, we're talking about mainly Cubans, Puerto Ricans, and Mexicans. So now you have these first generation Cubans living in New York City that they bring their tradition with them. They have the Afro-Cuban music, but at the same time, they are being exposed to jazz, right? So now their children who are born and raised in those cities, they start attending American schools. And again, they keep the same tradition of having the Latin music at home, but also listening to jazz. For whatever reason, you have a lot of Jews really into the Latin music. It got so popular among the Jewish community that I would say there were two people that helped make Latin music more popular in the big cities. And those two guys is Dick Ricardo Sugar and Bob Pedro Harris. They purposely changed their name to Latino names to blend better with the Latino community, but they were Jewish. And they both hosted the first Latin music radio shows in those times. Those radio shows became very popular, and now you have the Latino and the African American community really engaged in this type of music. Around the early 1930s, you have three people, I would say, that were the founders of Latin jazz, I would say. The first one being Mario Bauza, who is a Cuban musician. His first instrument was the clarinet, but once he moved to New York City, he fell in love with the sound of the trumpet, specifically Louis Armstrong. So he started practicing the trumpet as well. And once he was in New York City, he got into the local jazz music scene, and he started learning about jazz and playing with all these musicians. But at the same time, he had some ideas about incorporating his music with jazz. At the same time, you have more Latinos coming to the big cities, and it gets to the point that there's a bigger population of Latinos that they start hosting these dances in clubs and at the YMCA as well. They mainly play mambo and cha-cha. For the non-musicians, cha-cha is like a medium tempo kind of music, whereas mambo is like the fastest beat. So you could probably think that mainly Latinos would attend those dances, but as time went by, you would have Jewish, you would have Italians, African Americans attending all those dances because they were really into that kind of music. Now, being closer to the late 1930s, you have another main figure in this type of music whose name is Machido. He's from Cuba. He was a singer and a composer. So you have Machido and you have Mario Bauza, two main figures that helped shape this music. So basically what they did, they came up with an orchestra called Machido and the Afro-Cubans. What was so particular about Machido and the Afro-Cubans is that they started experimenting with Afro-Cuban rhythms and big band arrangements. So in 1942, they came up with what's considered the first Latin jazz tune called Tinge. Okay, and there were earlier attempts of combining jazz with Latin music, like for example, in the 1920s, you have Duke Ellington hiring a Puerto Rican trombonist to compose a couple of songs like Caravan, Conga Brava. But they were not really, I wouldn't classify them as a combination of Afro-Cuban and jazz because it had the swing feel, not something like you would hear in mambo where you have a full rhythm section. But going back to the late 1930s, now you have Mario Bauza with Machido. They came up with this orchestra that was not necessarily involved with Latinos. So that orchestra you have African Americans, you have Latinos, you have local jazz musicians from the area, and it became the very first multiracial band in the U.S. I didn't know that until recently. So in 1942, like I said, Mario Bauza composed the very first Latin jazz tune called Tinge. And it had a 2-3 feel. Love it. For the non-musicians, let me explain. So in Afro-Cuban music, you have 3-2 clave and 2-3 clave, which clave is a rhythmic pattern used in Afro-Cuban music. So an example of 3-2 clave would be like this. So that's 3-2 clave. And an example of 2-3 clave would be like this. Now, typical Cuban musician doesn't necessarily think on 2-3 clave or 3-2 clave because it's so natural for them. But Mario Bauza, one of his contributions was to create that system of 3-2 and 2-3 clave, so the American musician could understand where the accents are in music. As the Machido and the Afro-Cuban started to become more popular, now you have the local jazz musicians who hear about this new band in the area. And you have some people like Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. Specifically, Dizzy Gillespie sort of joined this movement of Afro-Cuban jazz. Back then, they probably wouldn't call it Latin jazz. They would refer to it as Afro-Cuban jazz. So Dizzy Gillespie got together with Mario Bauza, and they tried to put something together. So that's when in the late 40s, you'd have another musician from Cuba whose name is Chano Pozo. Mario Bauza introduced Chano Pozo to Dizzy Gillespie, and Chano Pozo became the first Latino in Dizzy Gillespie Orchestra. This took it a step further because now you have two main figures like Dizzy Gillespie and Chano Pozo, people from two different musical backgrounds, and they got together to write some of the classics of Latin jazz. We're talking songs like Manteca, and there's Tintindeo, those two. As time went on, more people started getting into this type of music, and in the Machido and the Afro-Cubans Orchestra, a new figure joins the band, and his name is Tito Puente. With Tito Puente, he was not necessarily the band leader, but he was a prodigy at what he did. He was playing timbales, congas, anything that had to do with percussion. He played with the Machido and the Afro-Cubans for a couple of years, but then he had to leave the band because he was drafted to go to war. So when Tito Puente came back, he went to the Juilliard School of Music, and he studied music and orchestration. Now, Tito Puente was not Cuban. He was of Puerto Rican descent. His parents were Puerto Ricans, but he was born in New York City. So again, he had all the best of both worlds. He grew up listening to Latin music, and again, going to Juilliard, looking at music from a more academic point of view. Got all these great ideas that only enhanced this movement and took it a step further. Most people would probably think that Tito Puente was Cuban because he would only play that music, but we know he was not. And Tito Puente, he started by playing salsa, so more like I would say ethnic Afro-Cuban music. So he recorded a couple of albums playing mambo, playing cha-cha, but it wasn't like until 10 years later, after he released his first album, that it became his most popular album called Dance Mania, released in 1958. And it was mainly, like I said, mambo and cha-cha-cha, but with more influence of jazz in the horn section. Typically in these type of orchestras, you would have the Latinos in the rhythm section playing congas, timbales, bongos, and the horn section you would have African Americans, white Americans, and Latinos sometimes too in the horn section. So one of the things that made Tito Puente Orchestra special was his rhythm section. In that time, he had two amazing musicians. One of them was born in New York City. His name was Willie Bobo. And the other one was another percussionist from Cuba. His name was Mongo Santa Maria. So in those times, you had Tito Puente, Willie Bobo, and Mongo Santa Maria, probably the best rhythm section of Afro-Cuban music in New York City at the time. So we could say that Afro-Cuban jazz or Latin jazz was born in New York City. After a couple of years of them playing in the area, have other things that help spread his new music. Records like RCA Victor. Oops. Yeah, records like RCA Victor and Tico Records. A lot of the musicians like Tito Puente, Tito Rodriguez, another singer from Puerto Rico, would start releasing their albums through those record companies that would only release Latin records and Latin jazz. So now you have this, you have radio shows playing Latin and Latin jazz music. You have record labels advertising this music. And then you have some movies that also started playing Latin music as well. So things started to get even more popular. It got so popular that when Tito Puente really became that famous in New York City, he started going on tour to Florida, and mainly Florida because in Florida, a lot of the clubs and businesses down there were owned by Jewish. And again, Jews really liked that type of music. In one of those shows, he was hired to play down in Florida, but something unexpected happened. They offered him this deal to play for this entire season in clubs in Florida, but they told him to not bring his best rhythm section, which was performed by Willie Bobo and Mongo Santa Maria. And the reason being is because they were dark skinned. So Tito Puente had no choice other than not take his best rhythm section to Florida, and he had to fire them really. And instead he got other percussionists, Ray Barreto and Santito Colon. Many people in that music scene were, I would say, offended by what Tito Puente did, but that was his choice if he wanted to take that gig. As a result, Willie Bobo and Mongo Santa Maria, they went to the West Coast, where at that time they started listening to Latin jazz. It was becoming a thing, and they met with another American musician whose name was Carl Jader. Now, Carl Jader was probably the most successful non-Latino musician in the Latin jazz world, I would say. So now you have Carl Jader, whose main instrument was the vibraphone. We play vibraphone, and you have Willie Bobo on timbales and Mongo Santa Maria on congas. Some of the best Latin jazz records happen in the West Coast as well. I would say one of the albums that I would suggest listening to would be let me find it. I have a bunch of notes, and it's difficult to keep track of everything.
You're doing a great job. Don't worry
Oh,
about it. Just
thank
keep
you.
going.
Sure. Okay. The album was released in 1958 by Carl Jader, and this album had a different flavor again, because now this band is not led by a Latino, but by an American who has listened to some of the Tito Puente music, the Machido Orchestra, and I would say the two main places where Latin music became popular would be New York City and San Francisco and the LA area. As Carl Jader on the West Coast became more popular, now you have more people that wanted to collaborate with him, like George Shearing, another jazz pianist. And then you have another main figure that came, which was, let me forget his name. Oh, I'm running blank. What was this guy named? It's a Mexican percussionist that lived on the West Coast. I have to get back to you on that. At this point, it was starting to be the early 60s, and that's when the Bossa Nova came to the US. Now, the Bossa Nova comes from Brazil, and the main figures of Bossa Nova, I would say, were Antonio Carlos Jobim and João Gilberto. What's different about the Bossa Nova compared to the Afro-Cuban music is that the Bossa Nova is more like a poem with very intricate chords that would probably be more ear-friendly for the jazz musician. Of course, it had a different beat. The Bossa Nova is much slower than a mambo and a cha-cha. But one of the American musicians that explored the Bossa Nova was Stan Getz. So in the 60s, you would have Stan Getz recording an album with Antonio Carlos Jobim, even Charlie Parker, who was another great guitarist. So when they brought the Bossa Nova in the 60s again, it also became a new wave of music. It got to the point that jazz singers like Ella Fitzgerald, Frank Sinatra also got into that type of music because it was different. The main difference between the Brazilian music and the Afro-Cuban is that the Brazilian music is more, how would I say it? Brazilian music has it's not so much about the rhythm compared to the Afro-Cuban rhythm, but it's more about the melody and the chords, how they all go together. It is more like, so the Bossa Nova is more jazz than Latin, whereas the Afro-Cuban is more Latin than jazz. I think that's the best way I can put it. And now you have the Afro-Cuban, now you have the Brazilian music, and they all fall under the category of Latin jazz. So if I were to summarize the whole thing, I would say that main influence of Latino and American jazz was the rhythm and the instrumentation as well. Because in big bands, you only have one drummer, but now if we're talking about Latin jazz, you probably have a drummer, you have a timbale player, you have a conga player, you have a bongo player. All those things rhythmically, it makes it more interesting. And I think that's what appealed to a lot of the jazz musicians from that time. As time went on, Latin jazz started evolving, but the Afro-Cuban and the Brazilian were the first two main types of Latin jazz, I would say, that became popular in the US. Later in the years, you have more versions of Latin jazz from South America, like from Colombia or from Peru, like we have the Afro-Peruvian rhythms, or like from Colombia, you may have the vallenato or the Afro-Colombia rhythms, who have also experimented with some jazz, but they haven't become near as popular as the Afro-Cuban or the Brazilian type of music. I'm going to play a couple of songs because I think I've talked too much by now. How are we doing on time?
Wait, we're doing fine on time, but I think people are eager to hear some music.
Yeah, let me
We
play
have
some.
several requests, and then I have a few questions, but I think if you could play some music, that would be really, people are here to hear a lot of, to hear your music.
Okay.
No pressure.
The first one I'm going to play is called Café Cubano by Nestor Torres, a Puerto Rican flute player. Café Cubano means Cuban coffee. Here it is. I can hear you clapping. That's pretty good. I have another song.
Please,
Oh, thank you.
please.
Next song is called Recado by Jalma Ferreira.
That was great.
Thank you.
Let's ask a few questions, and then we'll go back to the music, which I think everybody is interested in. So there's a little bit of a controversy about where Tito Puente is from. And Elsa, would you like to speak?
Yes, I know that Tito Puente's family is from Lajas, Puerto Rico, because I have been told through my family relations that the one side of my family married into their side of the family. But what I'm trying to figure out, because I've been working on my tree to include him, is was Tito Puente's first name really Tito, or was it something else?
It was okay. His first name was not Tito. It was something else.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what it is, because I was able to go back to, I believe it was his grandfather, I don't know, Santos Puentes Acosta. I don't know if that's him, that's his grandfather, because Santo Puentes from Lajas had several children, quite a few of them. And I'm trying to figure out who his father was, Tito's father. That whoever Tito's father was his grandfather, Santos. And I have no clue. But I do know from my family telling me that the Puentes, Tito Puentes family, because one of them, Rita Puentes, married one of my family members.
Oh.
That's why I know that he's related to us. you know, because there's a lot of people in Puerto Rico that come from small towns like Lajas, and they marry cousins and second cousins and third cousins. So I'm trying to figure out what was Tito's real first name.
A lot of these Latin musicians in that time, they would have these stage names or not necessarily their first name, like musicians like Mongo Santa Maria. His first name was not necessarily Mongo, it was Ramon.
Uh-huh.
I think a lot of these musicians would also change their names, so it's easier for the American crowd to pronounce their name. Like Tito, that was a very easy to pronounce compared, I don't know, to my last name. Yeah.
But I do know he was born in New York, Tito.
He was born, so his family was from Puerto Rico,
right.
But he was born in New York for sure.
Right. So I know that he was born in New York because I actually found him. I believe this was him, born 1923 in New York and died in the year 2000.
Correct.
Does that sound like him?
Yes.
Right.
That's
so
him.
Yeah, I found him, but I'm trying to find out who his father was and what was his real name.
Somebody just gave us the answer. So his first name was Ernest Anthony.
Oh, wait a minute. You know, it's interesting you just said that. Let me write it down. Okay, Ernest, where is it? Ernest
Anthony.
It's in the chat. Just copy it.
Yeah,
I'm doing it right now.
okay, so I think we're gonna move on to the next question.
Thank you.
Which somebody asked me before the program began. What was YEYE? Do you know about that? Ye, have you ever heard of that?
YEYE.
It was a type, they said it was a type of Latino music that had a big influence. Maybe not.
I actually don't know about that. This is the first time that I've heard this term.
That's
Never heard
okay.
it before. Sorry.
Do we have another question? I think they want your music.
Okay. Well, I play a couple of Afro-Cuban oriented songs. Let me play a couple of Brazilian tunes for you now. This song is called Desafinado by one of the most important figures in Brazilian music, whose name is Antonio Carlos Jobim. Desafinado.
I think everybody loves Joe Beam,
Okay.
which brings up a question from someone else's name I'm not going to try to pronounce, but it's in chat. Hi, I was just wondering what style of Latin music is your favorite to play? And P.S. beautiful playing as always, and I love the history. So the question is, what style of Latin music is your favorite to play?
Ooh, I like all of them. Maybe the one that I have more experience playing is probably the Afro-Cuban, because that's the style that I would play with William Patterson University Latin Jazz Ensemble. But lately, I've been experimenting more with the Afro-Peruvian rhythms. I'm from Peru, and right now, because it's something that I haven't played before, it's what's getting my attention at the moment.
Great. And I think people should feel free to write in chat other music that they like, Latin jazz that they like, so we can all read about it. And maybe Alejandro, at the end of this, you can suggest a few sources for music that people might go to, a few records or whatever. So how about another song?
Yeah, I'll do one more.
Okay. Really beautiful. So we have a couple of favorites in chat. If people can look at it, they can see there's two favorites, and or actually we have two favorites. So maybe people will feel free to write in some more favorites. I'm also going to make a quick plug for Union Public Library newsletter. If you did not get a newsletter about today, this week, with a list of programs and information about the resources, you are missing out. In order to keep abreast with programs that we're having at Union Public Library, like a haunted tour of New Jersey cemeteries, or de-stressing by decluttering, or any number of things, you need to keep in touch. So please look at, give me your email address, or just write yes in chat, and I will put you on our newsletter list. Next week, we have a program on retirement and Social Security. I will be attending that one for sure. Alejandro, can you give us some sources for where we might listen to Latin jazz, or some music suggestions, record suggestions? And that's open to everybody. And of course, WBGO, Newark's own, is a great place to listen to jazz of all kinds.
Well, I'm going to suggest, just because, and I'm going to be biased about it, that you should all attend the next William Patterson University Latin Jazz Ensemble. It will be sometime next year, probably in May or April. We usually bring somebody who is very well known in that genre, so you should attend the show. They will probably live stream it, and if you feel comfortable, you could probably attend the show in person as well. Besides that, I would say YouTube has tons of records there. You could probably find the entire Tito Puente discography on YouTube. Songs like Mambo Diablo. There's an album, especially I would recommend for the drummers, that has T Mombo, which is stands for Tito Puente, Mongo Santa Maria, and Willie Bobo. T Mombo is a great album where they showcase, I mean, their expertise in percussion. Yeah.
And we have a plug for the Newark Museum of Art, the Jazz in the Garden series. So be sure to check that out as well. Does anyone have another question they would like to ask? I had read that Latin jazz had quite an impact on Louis Armstrong. Do you know anything about that? Alejandro?
Oh, Louis Armstrong. I know that Duke Ellington, like I was saying, was trying to do some Latin with jazz, but not quite to the level of Tito Puente. But I'm not aware about Louis Armstrong trying to do Latin jazz.
Okay, that's fine. That's totally fine. Who are the new artists besides yourself as one of the major new artists? Who else is out there that we might want to listen to?
Poncho Sanchez, that's the guy I was thinking of. He's from California. He's a percussionist and a singer. It's an amazing group. Oscar Hernandez, a great Latin jazz piano player.
What I'm going to ask you to do is write me some names, and I will include it in a follow-up email to everybody so that they can hear some of the names and places, etc. And I don't know if somebody's on the line that has a source of jazz history that they go to, or Latin jazz wiki or whatever, but feel free to put that in the chat as well. So I think if there's no more questions, we're all set, but I'm eager to give everybody one more chance to sign up for the newsletter and to ask a question or a request or make a statement. You have lots of, I'll share the chat with you later, Alejandro. There's lots of compliments.
Sure. Thank you so much.
So thank you all for attending. I really, really appreciate it. Sincere
Yeah,
thanks.
thank you. It was really fantastic. And I
Great.
appreciate the idea that you're going to do a follow-up email. That would be great.
I try to always
Right.
do a follow-up email. So if I have your email address, you'll get the
Right.
follow-up email.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you, Alejandro.
Yeah,
That was
it was
terrific.
super.
Muy bueno.
All right.
Me
Daniel, I'm
gustó
hoping
mucho.
you get our emails.
Really great.
Great. Well, Alejandro, you're a hit. So I'm going to go
right now.
ahead. I'm going to get ready to end this. I'm going to stop recording. Hold on.